Welcome to the Mortal Realms, an Age of Sigmar story phase. Grab your hammer so we can clear a path through the chaos and forge our own narratives in the Age of Sigmar. Your allies through the free cities this episode are...
I'm Davy. The back of my neck is getting dirty and gritty. I think it's hot time because Sigmar's in the city.
Hey, I'm Paven, and there's no admission scandal in the Collegiate Arcane.
And this is Aaron, and a lot of people don't know this, but Sigmar built his cities on shock and roll. In this episode, we cover the lore of the Cities of Sigmar Battletome. Get ready to hear a whole lot of Germanic accents, fluffy pants swishing, and mustache greasing. And then if we have time after all that, we'll talk about all those free people. How are you tonight, gentlemen?
I'm good. Dibs on the mustache greasing. You guys can handle the other two.
Deal. I'm wearing my cords, so they're pretty swishy. As
all right, 5 on Germanic accent.
No, I don't know if this is gonna work. It's great to be here. Long time listener, first time podcast participant.
In fact, listeners, you hear we're doing a couple things a little different tonight. First, maybe it's obvious, is that for whatever reason, I'm feeling a little under the weather. So we're going to be recording this one remotely, which we haven't done in a very long time. We're no longer in the, what did we call the studio? The Boulderwood Studios. We'll be back here soon, but this one we're just giving it a little break. But then additionally, we have, I guess you would say Mortal Realms member, Paven, here with us today, filling in, picking up some slack, some might say, filling in, here to talk about the Cities of Sigmar Battletome that we're going to be chatting. Paven, welcome. We're very glad to have you.
It's good to be here.
Excellent. We didn't pay you to say that yet. And then we've got Davy. Davy, how are you?
I'm doing just fine.
Tried and true.
Yeah.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. So what, as we always sort of start with, what's everyone been up to? What have you guys been doing in the hobby? Paint me a picture of your painting your models.
I'll jump in there. So I've been doing a lot of Warcry stuff as part of kind of a local Warcry league and paint up terrain for that. I'm also busting out the Iron Jaws with the release of the new Orc War Clan book. Excited about that, putting some guys on shields, taking the opportunity to repaint some guys that I painted when I was in high school, so a long time ago. It was nice to update those a bit. I'm also digging through the attic into the deep backlog and seeing if I can come up with a nice city of my own with like kind of the old stuff I had from fantasy battles. So that's been really cool.
Man, what? Give me some examples of stuff that you find swimming up there.
So I have a unit of Leopold's Leopards, which is a regiment of renown.
Wow.
So that is a deep cut. Yeah.
Yeah. All metal. And I think about repainting some of those guys. Those guys would be great, like thematic free guild with their pikes. So that's cool. Otherwise, I got a lot of high elves. I got a lot of the old wood elves, wanderers. And I'm just trying to figure out like how to fit it together in a cohesive, like artistic vision. But it's all in my head now. I haven't really put any work forward towards it.
I think by the time we're done with this episode, you will have all sorts of ideas. That I'm not from me. I'm not necessarily an idea generator, but I'm sure they'll spontaneously germinate. Davy, what have you been up to?
As always, I've been doing plenty of Underworlds, assembling some war bands there.
Surprise!
Yeah.
You guys are really typecasting yourselves.
Yeah, I got my thorns painted up. Started on a ice paint scheme for my chosen axes. It was pretty fun. Try that out. I don't really think I stuck the landing, but I can play around with it a little bit more. And after dabbling a little bit in Warcry, I was really interested in the idea of doing Beastmen as untamed beasts. So I was playing around with some of that, which then had me pulling out my old Brayherd models and my Cygor and stuff, and then thinking about what it would take to get that back online. So pretty fun there. And then obviously there's the Grashrax Despoilers is one of the new Beastgrave warbands, so that kind of ties in. So I've been on kind of like a Beastman kick of late.
Very cool. And plus, the beauty of having a sidebar is you can actually use that in Warcry just straight up.
Sure, straight up.
So I recommend it. I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you?
I was about to ask you what you've been up to, Aaron.
Oh, gross! I was hoping that we'd never come to it. I've just been. I don't know when the last time I recorded something or when I would have brought this up, but I've just started clipping out and like assembling some Warcry terrain. Everybody's got the starter set, so I figured I wouldn't start with that one, but I was going to loop around and put together the like the Sigmar, what's it called? I can see it, but it doesn't have words on it. Shattered Stormvault. So I'll start there, but then I'll loop around then to the old Garden of Moor set too, and just start putting those together. I was playing my orcs for Warcry, and they're cool and neat, but I don't know, they're just not really grabbing me, so I'm trying to figure out if maybe it's time to evaluate picking up a Chaos Warband, or maybe even waiting for one of the newer ones to come out, because I just get the feeling that, like, from here on out, like, the cool stuff is going to be released for Chaos, and although I like the other Warbands, and I have a lot of the other non-Chaos Warbands, I think for me to, like, really want to dive into it, I think I might have to be on the side of Chaos, the way it was meant to be played. And so now my gears are turning a little bit there, trying to figure out what I ought to be playing. Haven't decided. I have no idea. I already gave away all the starter set factions I had already, so maybe I'm kicking myself for doing so. But I figure I'll start with the terrain, and maybe inspiration will strike. But that's where I'm at.
Is there a Warcry faction that or Chaos faction that speaks to you on some sort of
honestly, no, not necessarily. None more so than the others. Honestly, if at any point, if I literally had one in my possession right now, I would just do that, like, regardless if it was really grabbing me or not. But like I said, I had sold off the ones that came with the starter set. But honestly, I'm curious, just because it's what I don't know. It's the mystery out there, but not knowing what, like, the signs of the flame look like. Like, in my head makes me like, all right, well, that's the one I want, because I don't know what it looks like. It's the I'm sure there's like an Aesop fable about that, maybe a bird in the hand situation. So, but I am interested. I don't know how long it'll be before that comes out, but I'd be interested to see what that looks like, and then maybe I'd be willing to pick those guys up. I feel like I have an affection to Actually. But that is me in a very large nutshell. But that nobody wants to hear about that anymore. They want to hear about the story phase, and they want to hear about the Cities of Sigmar Battletome. So let's jump right into it. The story phase. In the story phase, we delve into the stories, characters, creatures, and environments of the 9 realms. Hey guys, we did it. We made it. We're in the in the meat of the episode.
It's just coasting from here on out.
Yeah, whew, now the hard work is done, admitting who we are personally to our audience. All right, so let's start. We're doing the Cities of Sigmar Battletome. So I feel like of the most recent Battletomes that we've reviewed, it ends up being these sort of esoteric, monstrous races that have very specific thematic elements, and they're very whole cloth, all part of a given force. They're all part of a given theme. I think this is probably the first Battletome that we've had to tackle that is they're so full of very disparate peoples and forces and races all packed into one book. It's sort of hard to it's a tough, to use my nut metaphor again, a tough nut to crack in terms of how do we approach dissecting it. So let me ask you guys a question right off the bat. If you could sum up to someone who maybe knew Age of Sigmar but wasn't really sure what to expect from a Cities of Sigmar Battletome, or what a Cities of Sigmar Battletome would contain, if you could sum it up in one sentence, how would you do so? How would you explain the Cities of Sigmar?
Well, I think appropriately the word that comes to mind is cosmopolitan. Like there are so many different different factions that are all kind of put together. A less cool word would be soup, but all these different factions, and so maybe the greatest variety within a single book, and all the freedom that comes with that.
I love it. I feel like I have a better idea, but Paven, drive the point home for me.
Okay.
Sum it up for me.
The Cities of Sigmar are an alliance of elves, Duardin, and humans. sent out to build Sigmar's empire after the Age of Chaos.
Excellent. I know what elves are. I know what Duarden are. I know what humans are. I know who Sigmar is, and they're all coming together.
Yeah, I was really trying to stick to the one sentence.
Excellent. I like it. I love it. And since I'm asking the questions, I don't have to come up with a sentence. So you did it for me. But they are the mortal followers of Sigmar. Both the citizens, like the residents, but then also the defenders and his offensive arm of the cities of the mortal realms. Excellent. Perfect. Done. End of episode. We solved it. No, there's more to talk about. So I guess a good place to start would be the beginning. Like where do these folks come from then? Where did we get these groups of disparate forces? Paven, can you maybe paint me a picture of early days?
Yeah. So if we're going to start at the beginning, we're going to want to start in the Age of Myth, where
I've heard of it.
Yeah, there is there's a utopia somewhat of a utopia among the mortal races, where there are like multitudes of different kingdoms of elves, of Duarden, of humans, of other races that have like separate cultures and kingdoms and, more than we could count and think of. And they were ruled by a pantheon of different racial gods. And, everything was pretty good. The realms were, wet and wild, and magic was everywhere, but it's still like their order was able to come, and they were able to raise their kingdoms up, and that's where kind of the board is set.
Everyone always talks about how wild the Age of Myth was, but they never bring up how wet it was. And I'm glad to hear you finally bring it up, because I've been meaning to this whole time.
It's the secret thing about the realms that they don't want you to know. So.
Yeah. And rule number 9 will shock you.
Yeah. So I think so Paven is hit it on the head as far as where they come from, and we're going to talk more about like how they develop. But I think what really defines these factions are the fact that they got that the Age of Chaos came along, and this is them reestablishing. So many of them are sort of their identity is based around what they did, how they responded, and what they've done since the Age of Chaos arrived, and then their actions in the Age of Sigmar. As that really gives them a lot of their flavor on the way, and we'll get a chance to delve into that in just a little bit.
Sure. Well, and you mentioned the Age of Chaos, so we can sort of maybe boogie onto that. So there's this paradise, this wet and wild. I love it. I'm going to keep bringing it up. Wet and wild, the Age of Myth, but then as we've covered multiple times. Nothing gold can stay. Paradise Lost. The Age of Chaos rolls up when those chaos forces are able to infiltrate the Age of Myth, and basically knock down the tower of blocks that Sigmar and his pantheon have built in this sort of paradise. So they get their claws on things, and they're dead set. They being chaos are dead set on tearing down these civilizations that have been created, and it's the age-old story. We've talked about it multiple times that obviously the pantheon of order fights back, does what they can to try and save the mortal realms, but one by one, whether the pantheon falls apart through distrust, betrayals, etc., but everyone starts to sort of every man or lady for themselves. Sigmar realizes sort of the futility, at least of their current situation of standing and fighting, and instead pulls back his forces to Azir, and with the intention of locking the door and saving his people in Azir. And so what we get here is all these residents, those humans, Duardens, those elves of the mortal realms, have to sort of make a choice, though it seems to me that the choice is probably pretty easy, that whether or not they follow Sigmar back to Azir, boogie back through whatever realm gates they have to get to safety, or stay and fight, or stay and hide, or stay and become nomads and travel around and face the forces of chaos, or avoid the forces of chaos, as the case may be. And so this is sort of, although maybe not the titular cities of Sigmar, what Sigmar is doing is he's pulling back these races and these forces and sort of populating the cities of Azir, basically. He's bringing all these people from all the realms and bringing them back home to Azir and his cities there, which, although I mean, again, aren't the cities we're necessarily talking about here, but they're just as populated and urban and cemented in the realms in Azyr as they are elsewhere.
And Aaron, if I could jump in here, I wanted to start kind of calling out a couple of important points.
Please do.
Cities of Sigmar and the races within are all kind of tied together with a kind of a common cultural experience. And so we've gone over like two of the like touchstones that like kind of everybody that went through that is going to end up in these Cities of Sigmar that happened to them. So one is like they had like great cultures and great cities and kingdoms of their own, and then they were destroyed and they had to leave and they had to become refugees into Azyr. Which
is a pretty humbling experience for these people who maybe come from really great society.
It's very like culturally devastating, that experience, and a lot of like kind of what happens later, as well as like how the races exist in the modern era, is going to be like a reflection of like kind of that trauma, that shared trauma.
Yeah, true. We're maybe diving into those, the section of the Battletomes where they talk about they have different historical like bullet points that's worth bringing up. One of them is actually interesting here in the Age of Chaos, is that as Sigmar is pulling his forces back into Azyr, and everybody's rushing through whatever realm gates they can to get to safety. This is the first I've heard of this, which you would have thought had been brought up earlier, but apparently Chaos was wise to what Sigmar was doing, and they were sending infiltrators into Azyr. I guess I never really realized that, it wasn't just a safe bet as soon as you cross that realm gate. No, there was still maybe a little bit of danger, and Chaos was still sending. It was still spreading. There's nothing keeping them out of Azyr at this point before the gates actually shut. And so Sigmar, pretty in tune to his realm, more so than probably anywhere else, starts realizing that, I've got these chaotic infiltrators here. What am I going to do? So he basically weeds them out himself or through his forces and starts killing all these the chaos sneaks who have snuck in. But he doesn't stop there. He takes it a step further. And not only does Sigmar take out the actual very distinct chaos followers, but then he starts taking out folks who could possibly be chaos followers, who might fall to chaos in the future, or who have a predilection to chaotic tendencies or things of that nature. So he is not taking any chances. And if you rub him the wrong way, or if you have a stink of chaos about you, he's gonna take you out. And that pretty hardcore. By no means have I ever thought that Chaos or Sigmar, is a completely benevolent and merciful leader, but this ranks highly of the harsh reactions scale for at least as it pertains to Sigmar.
This when you talk about how the different Stormhosts maybe embody different aspects of Sigmar, this is where you see his Knights Excelsior side coming out.
Sure. Yeah. I guess they had to get it from somewhere, right? And there's an example of it. Pretty no chill, Sigmar. No chill at all. But do you guys have any other thoughts about the Age of Chaos before we move past it?
No, I mean there's one mention here about with Fall and Flight where they talk about the fall of the Atlantic Empire. I feel like that's something we've heard a few times, and maybe Aaron, you remember the different places it's been referenced.
A couple places. Path to Glory.
That's what I was gonna say. It was that actually the Atlantic Empire itself there?
I believe so.
Oh, cool.
But it's thrown around in a whole bunch of other places. Yep. And I wish they'd stop teasing me about it and they just give me some Atlantic Empire some lore. It's got to be coming any day now, right? GW, right? Black Library, hook a dude up. But I love seeing those references. And if there's any point in a Battletome where they want to point out or give you little tidbits from other books or other lore sources, you get a lot of that stuff in these race history segments. And so I always comb through these with a fine tooth comb to see what references I can suss out. Mm-hmm. It's very cool. But you mentioned the Atlantic Empire. They stood as long as they could for 1,000 years or something in the Age of Chaos, but they obviously eventually fell and dropped a ton of rubble on the conquering forces. And there was a few other cities as well that did what they could to hold out. But one by one, they sort of inevitably fell. As we've seen.
And then here it talks about them taking up a nomadic lifestyle to stay one step ahead. And that is that's the first mortals we ever saw in the in the Age of Sigmar fiction was back at the opening of the Gates of Azir, the first novel, where these nomadic folks trying to stay ahead of the Bloodbound.
Yeah, one step ahead of that. But that basically leads us to the Age of Sigmar. We'll fast forward quite a bit. Stormcast, lightning bolts, Realm Gate Wars.
I thought it was cool. They did mention moving along here the Season of War, which I guess I always thought of as just as sort of the campaign that they did. They're referencing it here as like this is a specific era in the timeline of Age of Sigmar, which maybe you guys knew. I didn't quite realize it had an in-game. You know what I mean? I thought it was just sort of the out of game reference for that campaign. I didn't realize like in fiction that's how they reference that time. So that was kind of cool.
No, yeah, and I think they did reference it in fiction, or like you remember like their goal was they have all those cities, and like hopefully ideally one city was going to get taken over by like a different faction, and it just was coincidental that they all were like maintained by order. But I think it was supposed to be a timeline in the fiction such that like, you know, a given city could have been taken over by destruction or chaos or something like that. It just didn't shake out that way. But yeah, no, and I love the fact that they keep referencing it. I feel like every once in a while they'll throw in a little nod towards it, and I think no better time to do it than the Cities of Sigmar Battletome. But I'm glad they're sort of staying true to their word, and like that was the intention, that this was going to be a permanent part of the tapestry of the history that is the Mortal Realms. And I hope the fact that they reference it and they still bring it up means that maybe they'd be willing to do it again in the future. Hint, hint. Nod, nod. So there's that. So we are fast forwarding to, and I guess the Seasons of War is a great time frame because that is one of the times where we got first introduced into these cities that Sigmar is creating. So we're post the Realm Gate Wars, and Sigmar's plan sort of reaches that sort of next stage. He's no longer waging war, exclusively war, but rather he's got a second component to it, which is the settlement side of things. Paven, now that we're past the Realm Gate War side of thing, and we've entered the Season of War city founding time frame of the Age of Sigmar. What about this era strikes you? What jumps out at you?
I think one of the really cool things I like is how like kind of the results of one event lead to the other. Like we talked about how the events of the global campaign led to the holding of the three cities of the Seeds of Hope, which we're going to talk about later. But also, I've noticed that a lot of the cities we're going to talk about here are in Akshi or Gairan, and weren't those two of the gates that the Stormcast were able to hold at the end of the Realm Gate Wars? And it's just I don't know. You guys tell me. Is that correct?
No, that's exactly right. Like you had the sense, and the realms are vast, so there was no place that victory was complete. But the greatest successes that they had were in Akshi and Gairan. It felt like Gur was a wash. Shaman was had the Thossus Blade Storm fall to Archaon. That felt like a fail on that end. And then Nagash did Nagash things over in the Realm of Death, and somehow we still don't know very much about Ulu and Hish. So, but yeah, you're totally right. Gairan and Akshi ended up feeling like they're the better footholds for the hosts from heaven.
So like it's really cool to see like the results of like the macro level war having effect in the narrative we're getting and in like game terms, in that the cities we can play in are in Gairan and Akshi. So that jumped out to me. Very
cool. Davy, what jumped out at you in this Age of Sigmar and this time frame?
So we already kind of mentioned Sigmar's purge of Azir, and then I liked getting that glimpse. There's a blurb here about the first purge of Excelsis, first purge, and that was kind of referenced in City of Secrets.
I think it's that. Yeah, I think that was the first purge.
Where
no, maybe it had happened before, but people were aware of it. Yeah,
right. And you weren't totally sure. You just knew that something like that had happened, and this lays it out. And we actually met this Lord Veritant Ceras Centanus, and his brutal purge is what got him the name the White Reaper. But so a couple things. One, we also found out that some of this is what weakened the chains of Slaanesh. It doesn't even mention it here, but these kind of this escalation of sort of violent acts are having repercussions. And also, although we don't see any, we don't get rules in this book for any cities outside of Akshi and Gyron. Excelsis is in Gur, so there's some room for either another tome down the line, or for you to sort of adapt one of the existing ones to that. So this is not comprehensive, I guess, from a rules perspective, or even a background perspective.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, furthermore, I think it throws some references off to like Lethis or some other cities in Shyish as well, that no rules or anything, but like it acknowledges that those cities exist, and there's definitely more to find out about these different cities. So we're still in the Age of Sigmar, and these cities are being founded, but obviously it's not necessarily an easy road. There's still war being waged, both externally and, as we find with this purge, internally, I guess, as well. Like chaos is pernicious in both directions. But then we can fast forward a bit more as well. The Necroquake happens. And then the following Soul Wars occurs next as well. And that just adds a whole nother element, a whole nother angle that these cities have to sort of contend with. No longer are they facing just the destructive forces of, greenskins or the chaotic forces out there that are, constantly trying to attack from both within and without. But now they've got a bunch of ghosts who can just like fly through your walls. I'm really glad we spent all the time building those as they come through and, freeze your heart or whatever the Night Haunt do. But furthermore, it's not just ghosts, but you also have to deal with your endless spells, the eruption of magical energies. It's never a good day for these free cities. They don't ever get a break. Constantly besieged by any number of threats. But it does make a point to, and I guess maybe this is where I remember reading about Lake Lethis, but they do bring up the fact that this city is built over one of those storm vaults that we've talked about in our previous episodes that Sigmar had hidden, whether under cities or in other secret places. But the Necroquake is revealed and shown and allowed non-Sigmar people, anybody who's not Sigmar, to come and find them. And there was this very valuable midnight tomb under Lake Lethis. I don't want to recap the whole story that we went into in our Forbidden Power, but the point is a creature was released from under that tomb, and it turns out, I think we know now that it's I'm not gonna be able to say this name correctly, but Katakros, Katakros, all of the above.
Acceptable.
Yeah,
I believe I hope that's true. Or in fact, maybe no one settled on anything yet, and I'm contributing to the final decision. But he's the Mortarch of the Osiarch Bone Reapers. There's a hot take right there. We're on the cutting edge of lore in the Age of Sigmar. You heard it here first. That's
probably not, but yeah.
That can't possibly be true. But it's just worth mentioning that these cities are also playing a factor in the Forbidden Power era, where they end up being sort of locations for these storm vaults, locations to hide precious artifacts for Sigmar, and there may be forces or evils or what have you hidden underneath them as well. So no matter the time frame, no matter the place, no matter the realm, these cities of Sigmar are important, and they continue to be important. All right, cool. So that's the history, abbreviated, truncated even. But let's talk about the people. This isn't a history lesson. We're not in school. Let's talk about what makes the city, the forces of the cities of Sigmar. What makes them who they are? How are they organized? How do they live? So I guess first, how do we get a city? Do they just spring up? Paven, walk me through it. If you had found a city of Sigmar, how would you do it?
Well, there's a lot to think about. This is a great question. Because you can't just, have some city planner come through and, you just get out the roads, put them in a grid, and, you got your residential, you got your industrial. There's a lot more to think about in the mortal realms because you're having to deal with ghosts, like giant monsters, corruption's everywhere. So there's it seems to be a tried and true recipe for founding a city of Sigmar. And the recipe is something like the first thing they want to do is they send down the Stormcast in a bolt of lightning. They clear out the whole land, right? And then before you even put down any stone, you got to start. Well, first you got to pick where do you want the city. Usually you want to pick it on a strategic location, like a realm gate or some other like big stack of realm stone or something like major, I don't know, port or rivers are important places where you might want to found a city.
How about on top of a mountain or on a pillar of like rock?
Oh yeah, you got to think about what else would be cool. I think that's a big thing. Like giant turtle is dope. Like on a cloud, like living volcano, all also good options.
Evaluate if any of those are available to you and start there.
Yeah, start there. Hit it with lightning. Clear out all the bad guys, and then you got to start. You got to get all the corruption out because the Age of Chaos lasted a long time. So you got to start like blessing the land and getting out all the bad juju. And then after that, you do start to build. And the Lord Ordinators and the Lord Castellans build a storm keep. And all of our cities that we're going to talk about have a storm keep at their core. That is kind of like the first foothold into the mortal realms. Keeping going on, you cleanse the land. But once you've done all that, then you send in the dwarven work crews and the engineers, and then you're doing your real city planning. But you're not just building streets, you're also blessing your buildings. You're working in magic into stone to make it so it keeps the ghosts out or keeps the demons out, so you don't have in one of the stories, all the wood was corrupted that they were bringing in. So you don't want any corrupt wood in your city.
Or anywhere, really. I mean,
yeah, in your treehouse, not in your boats, none of it. Also, significant shapes are really important. So you want to try to stay away from 8-pointed stars. It's probably a bad shape to build your city in. But there's also good shapes. I don't know, triangles are probably pretty good.
I think they're good.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a lot of good examples.
Nurgle can be a fan,
but I'm not building these cities.
Sure.
So the dwarves know.
One thing that's important to Sigmar when he's building, when these are laid out is the number 12 will feature a lot.
Oh yes,
and that is it's a throwback to the realm, to the world that was. And here, if I'm remembering, and if we had Paul here, he would confirm this for me. But I think it's the original 12 tribes that he kind of united when he was immortal and bringing the empire together in the world that was.
Yeah, I think that's been referenced before. That sounds right.
Yeah, it comes up in this book because I believe 12 great tribes also flee to Azir, tribes of humans. And so I think that is also an homage to that original kind of world that was lore, possibly.
So what you're telling me is now I have a city of Sigmar?
Yeah. Pretty much.
give or take. Perfect. So now I've got the city. What do I fill it with?
You fill it with people, Aaron.
Yeah, tell me about it.
So the most common race is human, being the most populous and the most, I guess, quickly reproducing race. But you also have elves are a common sight, and Duradin, but also stranger creatures.
Ooh.
Do we know what those stranger creatures are? Maybe. But that's cool.
They don't really go into strange. I mean, there are other allies and stuff, but
it's kind of nice they leave the door open to stranger creatures. Also, they specifically mentioned Seraphon live in some of the cities.
Sure, they've got little temples set up in the different cities sometimes, which is, man, I want that. Or maybe I don't. If my city's in such a bad bad neighborhood that the Seraphon have to come keep an eye on it, I'm ooh, maybe I should move. Maybe I should find a safer side of town.
This is interesting because the Seraphon kind of remain in this weird limbo of are they star memories or are they living, breathing? There was a significant event a while back where a spawning pool actually kicked out some actual Seraphon in one of the big sky ships or whatever, starships, star temples, whatever.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of cool stuff that could happen with the Seraphon. It feels like a lot of doors are left slightly ajar. So I'm really excited to see more. It's a little sad that they're not able to ally into Cities of Sigmar despite this call out. but maybe that's just something to look forward to.
Yeah, it would be cool. You would think having Seraphon in your city would, with their sort of infinite wisdom, they would maybe contribute to the ruling or government body of these cities. But that I didn't get that impression. But rather, they go in a different direction. Each city basically has some sort of what would you call it? A grand conclave, perhaps, which is a ruling group of people. Decision-making body that basically rules over every city. Every city has one of these things. It's sort of one of the unifying like facts or features of a city of Sigmar. I swear they mentioned it, I can't remember, but is everyone like the same size too?
No,
There's
so Azurheim has 244. The other grand conclaves are modeled after it, but the exact number of representative varies according to the size and influence of the settlement. So,
ooh, quick with that. Good job.
Couple interesting points. So the origin of the Grand Conclave is there used to be kind of racial and familiar representatives of that were part of politics in Azurheim, but that became very factional and a lot of infighting, and so Sigmar had to come through and crack some heads and deal with that, like all of that racial animus that existed in his utopian city. And so he established the Grand Conclave, which is supposed to be a meritocracy of like the best and the brightest to rule over the city. And it's also cool that Azurheim's political structures have found their way into the cities. And I kind of think of the cities as kind of like a, without getting too serious, like a kind of colonial relationship, in that like you have this dominant culture that is Aziri, if that's the right word, and it is like now colonizing all the mortal realms and bringing with it all of its culture and all of its political organization. And so there's like a common thread through all of the cities of Sigmar that they all have similar governance, and there's a similar way they're built, and they have like similar peoples, even though they all have their own character.
We've seen some cool things in a number of the fiction works of fiction that we've read, where there is this tension between the Azurites and the reclaimed tribes, the reclaimed civilizations. I like that they can lean into that a little bit, and I think you've laid it out in a way that makes a lot of sense as far as that colonialization goes.
Yeah, no, agreed. And it's both from a like where were you perspective, from when it comes to like the folks who were sort of left behind, like where you guys just closed your doors and you left us here, and now you come back not only thinking that you're better than us, but then you're implementing your rules and your laws, et cetera on us. It's fun's maybe not the word, but interesting to see the chafing that comes along with it. I agree. But we've got our ruling, our governing bodies of these cities, but they are by no means the only interesting factions or groupings of people. There's other interest groups that exist in these cities. Let's talk about some of these, made up of different races and historical contexts. So we talked about how the humans are the most maybe populous of the residents or citizens of these cities, and humans have a number of different, and I'll say it again, that these interest groups, these factions that have set up shop in a wide range of different cities. I'll just pick an interesting one here. Let's talk about maybe the Free Guild, who I think are probably our bread and butter, meat and potatoes, human defenses of our cities here. And so this is the what would have been known as the empire from the world that was, these swordsmen, your spearmen, your crossbowmen, your basically your regular run-of-the-mill troops with a smattering of I guess larger than life demigryph riders and your griffin riding generals and things like that. But these are the I guess the humans, the fighters, the people that make up, I think, the brunt of any any city's defense structures. And these, for you to make it in the Free Guild, generally you're going to be a pretty brave, capable, know your way around a sword or whatever your weapon of choice is, disciplined, regimented human, very I guess, very dedicated to the cause. You're going to be a devout follower of Sigmar.
Well, you can also be. There's also like a diversity with the free guilds. Like they could be like come from a long line of like warriors. They could also just be like, you know, the latest people they arrest out of the slums, and then they like draft into the army.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
For both. And these are like kind of the quote from the book is, I like Sigmar's empire is built on the blood and sacrifice of millions of humble humans, Duradin and elves. So these are those millions that are just sacrificed, unmourned and unremembered. Like this is like, you know, when you just got to grind out a war, you call on the free guild.
Yeah, if you just need bodies. It's interesting. He does say humans, Duardin, and elves. Do we have examples of Duardin and elves being part of the free guild, though?
I don't know if we have examples, but I imagine this is a little bit of like what is available as a miniature. But I like certainly like if you wanted your free guild to be more cosmopolitan, I think it would make a lot of sense and is in line with the lore here.
Okay, it'd be interesting. I wonder if we've ever seen an example, or if we will ever see an example of, you know, Duardin and elves just shoulder to shoulder, holding pikes or whatever, with humans, and then them not being, you know, a very distinct Duardin unit or an elven unit, but rather like them sort of intermixed. That'd be interesting to see. But we were sort of talking about, you know, sort of the origins of some of these forces before, and it's worth mentioning that these aren't all from Azir, but rather they're pulled from, whether it's the Azir, like the conquering Azirian forces who have come out and sort of colonize different cities, or they could just be the locals, I guess. And Pavement was just sort of alluding to that too. But they could be the local from whatever realm that they're you know, defending at a given time as well. So from that vantage point, yes, it is a maybe melting pot of a lot of disparate individuals, but all fighting for the same cause, and ideally under sort of a disciplined banner. You know, we don't necessarily see ranks and flanks in the game anymore, but like that's still sort of the image that they conjure. You know, them lined up in, you know, battle line, shoulder to shoulder with their peers, their compatriots, facing, you know, staring down the barrel of a, you know, chaos charge or something like that. Free Guild also serves as sort of a local police force type thing, and we kind of saw that in the Gloomspite book that we read. So they're not only the offensive arm, like out there ranging and waging war outside, they serve as the defenses for the city, and then also serve defenses sort of internally in the city as well, like as a local constabulary, or, you know, to some degree. And because of that, they are, you know, like both the small scale and large scale defense. They come in numbers. They are, if there were such a thing as a horde army of humans, it would be these folks. You've got a lot of dudes in a given unit, but very dedicated, very Sigmar-esque.
Yeah, and I want to also throw out there that they are culturally from Azerheim, in that they all draw, like the great companies of free guilds draw their lineage from those 12 tribes that fled to Azir. And as well as like kind of the shock troops, the demigryphs and the griffins, those creatures hail from Azir. So like they're kind of like that symbolism and that like kind of history is like ties them all together.
Yeah, you gotta import them from Azir. Were there any other humans that grabbed you guys?
So I think one of the crucial components that the humans are providing is a collegiate arcane. They're a, you know, when you talk about needing to defend yourselves, there's some dangerous magic out there, and so you got to bring some magic guys to help you out. So this is the collegiate arcane, and what's cool about them is because there may be individual races that have more, I would say, talented or more accomplished spellcasters. This is kind of a conglomerate of all these different cultures that they brought together, which is, it's cool. I never thought about it that way. It's like you've got all the magical traditions from all these different cultures, and they're able to kind of pick the best parts, or pick the experts for each. We saw a little bit about this with if you read, we have not read it for this, but Black Pyramid, we saw some collegiate arcane in there and some of the rivalries, but they all had their specialties, and so that's a cool aspect that gets represented in the rules as well down the line. The colleges were founded after the retreat to Azir, and then the towers represent each of the 8 winds, which is familiar to anyone who knew the world that was. And they've got their satellite campuses, and then one of their main tasks is to purify these realm gates. And like Paven was talking about, a lot of these cities are founded on realm gates in the same way that cities in our history are often founded on coastlines or rivers as trade routes and that sort of thing that kind of build up around that. They're pretty cool. They need some things to help them get along. One of the fun things, and we've talked about this before, is the idea of them being spell hunters. So there's reference to the Order of the Chain Flame. So they're a pretty pivotal part to the whole concept of Cities of Sigmar, and they're just kind of fun.
Just a little fun. Just a smidge,
fun.
Just a smattering of fun.
I like that. I like that one thing. They're all human, but they all have their own, just where they come from or what magical wind they subscribe to, or whatever the case may be. They end up being different in that way. So I've always kind of enjoyed that.
No, I agreed. So Paven, Davy, and I have talked about some of our favorite sub factions. Talk to me about some of your favorites.
So some of my favorite sub factions.
Yeah, hit me up.
So kind of stories and narratives that I really appreciated out of this book was like the Order Serpentis. So this is like an elven subfaction, and they once ruled the empire of Narkoth in Ulgu.
You're just making all those words up.
I always like specifics, even if they're like, nonsense. So it's a mist-shrouded land of boiling acid lakes and black rain, with castles of black irons like sticking up through the land, and so that's quite a visual. And they're bad dudes. They're slavers. They do human sacrifice and other vile deeds. And they had an empire where everybody rolled a dragon, and they were part of the alliance of order, and they were kind of protected by Malarion from like censure and like aggression from the kind of the more justice-minded forces of Azir. But like everybody else, they went down during the Age of Chaos, and most of the Order Serpentis, or the rulers of Narkoth, were too proud to flee or surrender. So most of them died, but a few of them were, shrewd enough to get out of Dodge, and they fled to Azir with everyone else, and they started to they were still very insular, and they still they were able to survive like the purges of Azir. I guess they were bad, but not so bad that they were murdered by the agents of Sigmar. So they regrouped. They brought some dragons, but they don't have nearly as much. And so what they are on about is they want revenge against Chaos for that slight to their pride, and they want to rebuild their kingdoms. And they see as the current war, whatever the Soul War, or whatever, the kind of overarching war versus Chaos, as a means to rebuild and reclaim their kingdoms, which they kind of view as a right. Other cool points about them is that they're really big into magical experimentation with their monsters, and so they like the Drake spawn, which are kind of like raptors they ride, are not necessarily a creature that is born or natural. It is one that is created from dragon eggs plus like sacrifice plus evil magic, and they make these kind of these scaly creatures, and the Hydra falls in that camp as well. So I think they're cool, and it's definitely like a point of like friction within like the Grand Alliance. Like the Order Serpentis are kind of there in the shadows, pulling strings, similar to the Darkling Covens, which we might get to. But they're not necessarily like, all in for the best for everyone.
Between these guys and the Darkling Covens and the Daughters of Cain, the side of Order puts up with a lot of nefarious people. I don't.
Yeah, mostly coming from elves.
At least the Malarian side elves.
So those underwater dudes, they're kind of douches. Well,
it's not the side of good; it's the side of order.
But not all elves, Davy, are awful. Let me tell you about some good elves. Well, I guess just less bad elves, and those are the Wanderers. My true loves, my original Warhammer Fantasy army. The Wanderers, or Wood Elves, as you may have heard other people call them, not me, but other people, are a bunch of nature-loving, granola-crunching elf people. But these are the folks that are more in tune with nature. They're the ones from the forest. They were basically originally residents of Gyran, but when the Age of Chaos rolled up, they noped the heck right out of there. They recognized the writing was on the wall, or was carved into the bark of a tree, maybe. I don't know how they write in Gyran, but when they were given the option to flee, whether to Azir or just elsewhere, and sort of leave the realm of Gyran to presumably the forces in Nurgle, who was mostly taken over. They did so, and so they became nomads, wanderers. I think we kind of referenced that earlier. However, that was not widely accepted as a great idea or necessarily a noble decision by, let's say, the Everqueen, Alarielle, or Sylvaneth, or anyone basically of that persuasion. And because of that, these wanderers sort of lost a little bit of their connection to their goddess, who was Alarielle, or the sort of the Sylvaneth, the tree spirits that they sort of had a kindred relationship with. And so in doing so, they became outcasts, exiled from the realms, their homes that they knew for so long. And they've sort of been cut off, at least up until relatively recently. We do have some examples these days of maybe the Wanderers who are able to get back into Alarielle's good graces here and there, or maybe they're able to win over some Sylvaneth. But by no means are they universally forgiven. But they're still doing their best. And so what they do for the Cities of Sigmar is they're scouts, they're watchers. They if for those cities that may exist in the forest, like a lot of our Gyran cities, they are sort of in tune with nature. They help defend and watch from their their tree, basically like the hunters, those tree stands that they have souped up for an elven defender, but they're out there trying to just restore the realms. And we've got our nomad princes who are basically descended from their old rulers, and they're trying to basically regain their status and make it up to Alarielle and the Sylvaneth. And so I like them, maybe not for that whole spiel that I just gave you, but because I still harken back to my old Wood Elf days. But I love the models, and I love their sort of the aesthetic, and I think it still fits, and I think it still works in the moral realms. Maybe not in a city per se. Maybe it's a little anathematic. It's an anathema to have them in a book that's literally called Cities, even though they ought not be in a city. But I'll let it slide for now. So that's another one of my favorite factions.
I don't know that they've earned their place yet back all the way in the wild. It might not be.
Isn't that weird that they've been kicked out of the wilderness, and so they have to hang out in a city, as instead of vice versa. Like, they haven't been exiled from a city, but rather they've been exiled into a city. They're like, oh, this is the worst. What, a roof over my head? This is garbage. Davey, tell me about another one of your fave factions, FFs.
I just liked how the Duarden factor in here. They kind of have their specialty, their role within the city. So the dispossessed take that name in memory of all the holds they lost. Now they're kind of the skilled labor force, highly efficient. They can clear out tunnels, and they are also part of the Ironweld Arsenal, which is a combined human and Duarden body, and they've featured in a bunch of the fiction so far. It's you always have kind of the interesting interaction between the humans and Duarden with that, but they seem to have sort of a mutual respect there, and it's fun where they get to come up with all the crazy inventions like the gyrocopters and the more bizarre artillery pieces in the steam tank and that sort of thing. But it's what's neat about this is this, like we talked about, like the many different elements, each providing their own specialty to the mix.
Right on. Paven, I'll tell you what, give me one more sweet faction before we move on beyond these groups.
Oh boy, how to choose. I want to talk about...
Or group all the rest of them together into one if you want.
Yeah, I'll just try to talk real quick. Actually, I'll just talk about the Shadow Blades because it'll be short and sweet. They're a mysterious elven cult. We don't know their origins, but they are closely allied with Sigmar and Azir, and they were first deployed in mass during the Purge of Azir. So that during this kind of rooting out all of the evil that came with the refugees into Azerheim, and so it was like an in mass deployment of assassins just into the general population, and just like imagine kind of the terror that would unleash. And they've been like kind of, and it says a century of murder here. Like it was like 100 years of purging and assassinations and of people disappearing and dropping dead. And that's a very like kind of interesting moment within the fiction. And as well as like you have this faction representing that kind of very brutal and devastating kind of decision by Sigmar. That's it. And the Shadow Warriors are cool. They're part of that group. It's not just the assassins, and Shadow Warriors are specifically part of the Shadow Blade group. But they're like elves that have lost everything to chaos, which there's a lot of people that have lost everything to chaos. And there's specifically a group of elves that have lost their kingdoms or their families or their kind of their hope. And so they join this group of like kind of devastating guerrilla warriors.
I was gonna make a gorilla joke. Never mind. Yeah, and those are super cool. And plus, there's the guy. Like, there's some folks on like horses too, right?
Oh yes, Dark Riders are also
Dark Riders as well. Yeah, so there's a million ways for them to come in and assassinate you. They get real creative with their methods. That's for sure. By no means are these all the factions. We're just touching on some of our favorites. There's plenty of other elven factions. We didn't even touch on what was left of the High Elves, which is the Phoenix Temple. There's this Scourge Privateers, which is also very cool. The Darkling Covens, I'm sure amongst others. So there's a whole bunch of different of these competing or working together allied factions set in all these different cities of different varying amounts. Some cities are predominantly controlled by one group of those folks that we talked about. Each city is sort of defined by where it is, what it does, but then also who lives there. And so, as you can see, there's a wide variety of different forces under the umbrella of the Cities of Sigmar. But hey, if we've got a Battletome called Cities of Sigmar, I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't go ahead and actually talk about some of the cities themselves. So the Battletome does have a number of examples of some of the great cities that were founded in this sort of time period, in this time frame.
And they all kind of split into two different realms, right? Gyren and Akshi, except for one,
which literally splits into two different realms, though. Hammerhall itself, the Sigmar's crowning jewel in the I'm going to say the rest of the mortal realms. And so that's where this book focuses some of these major cities. By no means are these the only realms that have these major cities, but Gyran and Akshi are prime real estate for Sigmar to have founded his sort of beachheads into the mortal realms. Davy, is there any particular city that grabbed you that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I liked Tempest's Eye. Tempest's Eye is in Akshi, and it's a mountaintop stronghold. There's all manner of sky ships, specifically even referred to some that I'm not totally familiar with. There was airships and gyro cutters, or maybe they're hero cutters. I don't know. Anyway, it's a hub for trade. The overlords are really invested in this.
I should have known.
They contract out some protection there, and but because and this was the part that I thought was pretty fun, was that it's positioned so high up that it's suffused with Azir magical energy, and so they have a little bit of that prophecy thing going on, and so they really kind of value engagement with I don't know, like you almost think of it as like a military intelligence, right? Like having foreknowledge. And so they have lots of scouts, and they have outriders and pistoliers and fast moving cavalry and gyrocopters and gyro bombers. And I really like the idea of this big keep that was up there. It made me imagine some pretty cool tables that you could build having a battle over this with big sort of precipitous drops and such. And like all these cities, they call out specifically which Stormhost has a keep in the middle, and this one is the Tempest Lords, who are all from Hessian nobility, and they think not only is it our job to wage war on behalf of Sigmar, but also we need to lead everybody because we're super good at it, and everyone should really value our opinions. So they're involved in like all the politics of the city and all the major decisions, which is an interesting take for a Stormhost. They got a cool color scheme too. So yeah, that was pretty fun. Every one of these cities also has a little blurb, and this one really kind of focused on Shadow Warriors, but it talked about some of the dynamics between these Shadow Warriors and what to expect from whether they thought the overlords were reliable or not, and so that was there are interesting dynamics, and visually it created some cool images for me. How about you, Paven?
I would like to talk about Hollowheart. It's a very interesting, cool city. So Hollowheart's really cool because it's built upon this giant pillar in the middle of this chasm. It's called the Shimmering Abyss is the chasm. And say on top of this pillar was once home to a old Tzeentch demon called the Weird Flame Drake. And that was killed by Hallowed Knights and Fire Slayers during the Realm Gate Wars, I believe. And this whole area is just suffused with magic, and the Shimmering Abyss just has tons of caves filled with all kinds of valuable minerals, but that includes Emberstone, which is the realm stone from the Realm of Fire. Hollowheart is in Akshi. And so it's got a lot of magical elements, but also like a few tensions, including like because Tzeentch had such a powerful influence on this land, they have to be on constant guard against corruption and against just like magic run amok. So the Stormcast and the Hallowed Knights have their Stormkeep here, and they Stormcast are on like constant vigilant guard against kind of corruption or mutation or wild magic. But what's different between that kind of vigilance and the kind of the relationship that the Knights Excelsior have in Excelsius is that it's also like kind of a very religious city, and you have this Celatrine cathedral, which is a great like kind of place of worship for Sigmar, and the Hallowed Knights are looked at as kind of like saintly protectors because of their piety and the kind of their general behavior. But they live in this shining citadel. Also, a lot of great spell hunters come from Hollowheart just because of the individual, like just the citizenry tends to have a resistance to magic because of like how suffused this area is, and they just have so many like really great wizards that they're like they can earn their keep doing the spell hunting. There's also a short story here. We should say that all of the cities have a short story relating to them, kind of like talking about the tensions and the like kind of a example of like kind of the stereotypical group that would be fighting for a city. In the Magic Unbound short story in Hollowheart, it's men and mages and fire slayers like kind of dealing with a Tzeentchian incursion and an endless spell kind of running amok in one of the caverns around the city. Very cool. That's Hollowheart.
That is cool, and that is Hollowheart.
I did that as an aside. That was, I think, the story I enjoyed the most. The wizard was pretty entertaining, just kind of absent-minded. I should probably, let's see. Isn't this interesting? Oh, I guess we should probably deal with that giant burning head that keeps on wrecking everything. I got a feel for how that. I don't know, like that. There was a cool take to have in there.
Do you guys mind if I tell you about the Living City?
There's nothing I want more.
Excellent, because I have it all queued up and ready to share with you and the listeners. So the Living City is a city in Ghyran, and it is one of the original Seeds of Hope. So it's one of those cities that everyone was sort of fighting over back in that Seasons of War campaign. How it came to be is Alariel when she was sort of roused from her like hibernation like status that she was in during the Realm Gate Wars, she was willing to sort of ally with Sigmar again, and as a show of good faith, just as a good faith gesture, she basically created the living city. Sort of, she raised the boughs of the Everspring Swathe, which is the continent in Ghyran where the city exists, and basically raised the stone walls made of intertwined tree limbs and other natural components, basically. And so she created it. It wasn't necessarily like built by Dwarden like some of the other cities were, but it was God made, basically. But in doing so, she allowed essentially all free people to come and to live there. It's not just meant for her followers, whether you're a human follower of Illyrio or you're a Sylvaneth, and those folks live there too. But anybody of the Order sort of faction can come and live there. It is home to the Oakenspire, which is the storm keep of one of the two storm hosts that hang out here. It's the storm keep of the Ghyran Guard, which is the dumbest named storm host that exists. But it also is home to a smaller contingent of the Hallowed Knights, which are way cooler and only the faithful. But those are the main defenders of the city. It's also home to a fair bit of those wanderers that I was talking about earlier, but they've been sort of relegated to the outskirts because of that sort of aforementioned tension between the Sylvaneth and what they would consider traitors to Ghyran. But it seems like they're making progress. Maybe they're making inroads into the city. One of their main exports, I feel like I'm giving a book report here. One of the main exports is Iron Oak, which is super cool. So I feel like we heard about Iron Oak a long time ago, maybe a Black Library book or something, where a knight from Ghyran was all decked out in armor, but it wasn't metal armor, but rather this hard as metal wood, which is this Iron Oak. But it's one of their main exports. It's this very tough, workable material for armor, for example, or any number of other building projects as well. It's very cool. The defense is made up of the Wanderers and the Sylvaneth and the Free Guild all working together under the title of this like Viridian Shield, which is very noble sounding and it fits the motif for sure. And then the little story that little blurb that they give you is basically what it looks like when those Wanderers in Sylvaneth and Free Guild are working together. You've got the sort of irreverent Free Guild working alongside the Wanderers, the very noble elven, very unhumored elven woodsmen. Both of those groups interacting together, and then also like from a third perspective, like referencing the Sylvaneth, like are they going to come? Are they going to come when they say they're going to come? Can we really trust them? Surprise, you can trust them, and those groups are able to drive off. I believe an example of the Order of the Fly, which we haven't seen in a long time, but one of Davy's favorites. I know that. Yeah,
for sure. There was a cool parallel here with the Overlords over at Tempest Eye and the Sylvaneth. Here's like, are they going to help? I'm not sure. And for different reasons, they're sort of not 100% reliable allies. So from the perspective of some of the factions that are counting on their aid.
Yep, exactly. So it just goes to show that although everyone's sort of fighting ideally under the same banners, there's still that
tension.
Yeah, exactly. And friction between the groups. Whenever you pull these disparate groups together, you're gonna get some of that, but you got to work through it.
Yeah, and I think it's a nice description of there's different levels of closeness between the different factions. Like the city dwellers are all very used to living and working together. So within the living city, the elves and the humans, but the Sylvaneth are kind of separate. Like they have common goals, but they don't always show up, right? They don't you're not necessarily, the Sylvaneth live in separate parts, and they're not necessarily your neighbors. You're not necessarily trading with them. They're just they are forest friends, but they're a little unknowable. And there's maybe there's a cultural difference there that's similar to the way the Caradron overlords interact with the Tempest Eye. They're not your family. They're kind of your colleagues.
Sure, business partners.
and then there's like the flip side of this city, and I don't know that we're going to hit every single one, but the flip side of the living city feels like it's Greywater fastness, where they're also in Gyran, but have like industrial wastelanded the surrounding area, and so the Sylvaneth are not going to come help them. And in fact, like they're almost under perpetual siege from the Sylvaneth all around them. And I like that those two concepts can exist at the same time.
Yeah, why can't you be more like your living city, Sylvaneth?
So Greywater, it's sort of like I said, this city under siege. It was this big battle where they unleashed great power to kind of turn back the tides of chaos. But the side effect was that they created the Ghoul Mirror, which is this basically toxic swamp all around them, which Sylvaneth not psyched about. But they are particularly famous for their artillery companies. If you think of like a super industrial city, that's what this is. And so I think that although the creation of the Ghoul Mirror was this one precipitating event, I feel like they're not helping matters with their continued heavy industry. But maybe they figure that's a lost cause for them or some such. And they have, again, they have the story attached to it is Reign of Fire, and you get to see, this is one of those examples of the dynamic with the Ironweld arsenal. So if that's what you want to read about, then hop into that one. That's kind of a good blurb of how they operate, fighting off a big old swarm of Skaven, and also some of the ideas of like how the defenses for these cities are set up. Because this is kind of like flies to honey or whatever, to use a more polite term, I guess, where you have these cities, they've kind of become targets, and so they have to be prepared to fight off whatever comes.
Very cool. Paven, you got another city you want to chat about?
Yeah, I want to talk about Anvilgard because it's got some real cool elements to it. So Anvilgard is a seaport in Akshi, so a hot, sweaty port. And it's in a jungle, so you might think like a kind of aggressive jungle would be like a theme of Gyran, but no, this is a realm of fire jungle, but it also has such a kind of mean and territorial plant life that they have to kind of fight it back using, and the way they're fighting it back, different cities do different things, but so example, Hammerhall, Gyran fights back their like aggressive fauna with like lava. In Anvilgard, they use noxious defoliants developed by the Ironweld alchemists, and it kind of shrouds the city in a perpetual like mist, or like kind of a humid smog. Just kind of, it feels very atmospheric to me. Probably not great for you, but we've been assured that it's harmless to humans or harmless to mortals.
Yeah.
Anvils of the Heldenhammer Stormkeep is here, because it's called Anvilgard and they're anvils, but they're kind of a more morose storm host, but I don't see them affecting the culture of the city too much. The culture is really heavily defined by the elves that live here. And so the Scourge Privateers, the Order Serpentis, and even the Covens all exert a lot of influence over the city. And it's kind of a kleptocracy, because they still have the Grand Conclave, but it's really all the strings are being pulled from behind the scenes by the Black Scale Coil, which is a council of elves that, like, through assassinations and bribery and other like kind of nefarious means, controls the governance of the city. And so when the Free Guild Guard of Anvilgard go out, they're usually going out to further the interests of the Black Scale Coil. So I think that's a city that has a lot of gray in it, which I like. It has a lot of like realms of friction I like, and that was just a very cool place that I want to see more of.
What else did you like, Aaron?
Well, let me tell you about the Phoenicium. Is another of our Gyran original Seeds of Hope cities. And so what it was is that initially it was just like a ruin, basically, at the base of this mountain range in Gyran. I think it's the Arborean Mountain specifically. It was like a weird tree-like mountain, and at one point, like during a mighty battle, this ruin was created as such because the lower slopes of the mountain were like torn apart, and a tidal wave of like sticky sap was released.
So cool.
Because it was a tree-like mountain, so of course a bunch of sap came down. But what that did is create like a giant like glacier, and it like preserved this area in hardened amber. Think the mosquito in Jurassic Park, but on a much larger scale. And so basically a bunch of like anointed of the Phoenix, what do you call it? The Phoenix Temple rolled up and found this place, and I'm like, oh, this is weird. Like, what have we found here? And their phoenixes like took to the sky and proceeded to like melt all this amber. And what it did is like it created a gold, like another mist here, a golden mist that sort of enveloped the ruins and persists even to today.
This one with a higher probability of being beneficial to mortal health.
I don't know, because I think it says enemies who stray too close to the mist are transformed into amber statues. And then they add you to the gleaming ramparts. So, like, yeah, maybe if you're cool, it's fine, but not everybody is all right. But anyways, what they did is they then built the city up once it was sort of freed from the amber, and it's now the capital city for the Phoenix Temple elves. So basically, it's those elves that worship the Phoenix. They ride around on their flame spire or whatever the ice phoenix is called, and that's basically their capital. So for the most part, that's who runs the show here. Even if you want to be in the army of the Phoenix Temple, you got to be an elf. But given that they do work so closely with Order, the God King does have another storm host that's based here. I think it's the Lions of Sigmar. So their Storm Keep is here as well. But yeah, it just is a neat place for the Phoenix Temple elves to call home. And so they need a place to live, and here it is. Pretty cool town.
Yeah, like a center of healing and rejuvenation.
Yeah, and they don't necessarily consider themselves like the armies here, or the city isn't necessarily a place to wage war from. It's very much more of a central location, like a beacon of culture rather than like a stronghold. But as you might expect, this is Warhammer. They do have to, fight a good battle here and there as is necessary.
Yeah, this city definitely leans more on the like kind of spiritual identity rather than like the kind of more economic or corporate identity of like other cities or the kind of military aspects.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool getting the spread.
Guys, we've all avoided talking about the big elephant in the room, or like in both rooms. In that there's Hammerhall, the big show. Maybe we all talk about Hammerhall together as allies.
Yeah, my favorite thing about Hammerhall, Paven already kind of mentioned this with where they've got to play creatively with the how it exists in the two realms at once. So. All the bounty and produce from Gyra in the Realm of Life is being provided over to Akshi. And as far as I can figure, most of what Akshi is providing is liquid hot magma to keep the jungles at bay on the other side.
What more do you want?
I think Akshi is also the side of like manufacturing. So you get the raw minerals, raw materials from, and the agricultural products from Gyran, and then they trade those for,
But this is what's fun. This is the sort of thing that you can only do with a fantasy setting. Like so it's enjoyable for that. I feel like I'm saying fun a lot in this episode, but
fun. Because it's a fun episode. Show. I'm having fun. Paven, what do you know about Hammerhall?
What I like about Hammerhall, at least the description here, is we're zooming in a little bit more than I've seen in the past. So they talk about like kind of the grandeur of Hammerhall and how it is like kind of the great city in the mortal realms that isn't Azerheim. But they also talk about how it's so big that you can't, not everything can be a grand palace. So they talk about some of the darker, seedier places called like the Cinderfall district in Blackwood Town, which are like kind of where the rough and tumble kind of groups and people's kind of scrap out their living. And so I think that's cool. Any kind of time we can zoom in real close and look at what's going on.
They talk also about the culture of the free guild regiments, and which they have. Is it 7 military guilds?
I have 7 written down.
7 military guilds. Each one descending from the tribes that Sigmar brought to his ear before the gates were closed. We've been saying 12, maybe it was 7, but they're very proud of how stubborn they are, how fanatical they are, and there's this whole thing about how one regiment lost their flag. It was this big shameful thing, and then they went on this huge suicidal charge after it and got wiped out. And you would think that would be a story about like, oh wow, look where foolish pride gets you. But the residents of Hammerhall describe it as like, oh, look at this time, we were so like stubborn and badass that we went to the very death to get a flag. And part of that pride and stubbornness is like thinking that they're the best because they're associated with the Hammers of Sigmar, the first storm host, and so they're proud to be associated with that.
This is like the Hammers of Sigmar city, right? Like this is if ever a city has a storm host, this is theirs, right? Yeah, that makes sense. We've spent a little bit of time in Hammerhall in, I'll say, previous episodes, in that when we read that little novella, appropriately named Hammerhall, although not only maybe half the time was spent in the city itself, but when Paven was talking about sort of the seedier sides of town, a bit of that story takes place in those, dark alleyways, warehouse districts, where you can get up to all sorts of no good, as we were sort of following a witch hunter about a mystery. So it very much tracks that there is these nefarious or opportunities to get up to nefarious work, even directly under the eye of the God King. One of my, I guess, favorite free guilds that we ever read about in the fiction is the Faithful Blades, which I think are based out of Hammerhall, or at least nearby Hammerhall. Both read in that Hammerhall story, but then also maybe referenced in the Shadespire book that we read as well. And I guess maybe a point that was made earlier when we were talking about free guilds just generally, that that's a good point. Not all free guilders are disciplined and noble fighters, but there are plenty of folks who are just in it because it's a job, or maybe have no desire to be in the free guild, or maybe have to cut loose and turn coat as well. So it sort of comes full circle back to some of the other stories that we've read. So I like whenever we get a chance to, I guess, revisit Hammerhall, even if it's less in a lore base, less in a story base, and more just in a battle tome. But all things, at least in this region, orbit Hammerhall. It is a force to be reckoned with. I think at one point it says something like it's almost a continent-sized type city, which seems exaggerated. Is an exaggeration, but
yeah, that's got to be nonsense.
I bet it seems that way. Hammerhall will be the sort of place that I imagine we'll revisit from years and years to come. That we're going to be spending a lot of time there.
Yeah, it feels like it's the sort of prototypical archetype. The first thing you think about when you think of Cities of Sigmar is Hammerhall. So I think you're right. I think it's going to be it'll continue to be sort of a pivot point moving forward.
Yeah, agreed. Do you guys want anything else about Hammerhall you want to chat about? I think we got it in one. Cool. We've got our cities. We've got our people. So apparently we've got our Cities of Sigmar. Everybody just stays within the city walls. They don't venture out. They don't interact with the world at large. Everybody just stays home and watches TV. Just kidding. We're going to have our enemies and we're going to have our allies. The book doesn't go too deep into, at least maybe specifically, who our enemies are beyond just sort of the generic forces that exist out there. But did you guys glean, or were you able to suss out any particular enemies or folks that are button heads with our Cities of Sigmar?
So I think they kind of make the case with all the little short stories there, one for each of the, so like 7 little short stories where they are fighting all kinds of different things. They're fighting, ghouls, and they're fighting beastmen, and they're fighting orcs and gloomspite. And I think it's kind of outlining just how many and myriad the threats are to the Cities of Sigmar there. So The enemies are everyone who's not Order, and then just kidding, also actually some of Order as well, depending on what they're up to. So,
surprise, it's Order. Yeah.
Yeah. Mortal Realm's a bad neighborhood.
There are no good neighborhoods. Well, I guess maybe Azir, but yeah, no, it's a dangerous place out there. But as far as the allies go, you could then argue that like a lot of the forces of Order at any given time could be an ally to our Cities of Sigmar. I guess probably your most tried and true are going to be your Stormcast, given that they are, Sigmar's will made manifest, and they're there to both protect the Free Guild and work. Not just Free Guild, the cities, and work alongside them, especially considering their storm keeps are set up within these cities, so they do work hand in hand and arm in arm. And then I guess we've talked about some other examples of other forces of Order who may live in these cities, like Sylvaneth or the Overlords, are other examples that have specific vested interests in specific cities that exist in the realms, the Living City and the Tempest Eye. Respectively. But then, as you might expect, we're working with all sorts of other forces of Order as the needs dictate, whether it's in this book or stuff that we've read elsewhere. I mean, you could hire a Fire Slayer group. There's plenty of opportunity to work with the Daughters of Cain, even though I don't know why you would want to. We've read in the Forbidden Power story how that I didn't have Deepkin come to sort of save the day at Lake Lethis, to save the forces there. So it occurs that other forces of Order will rise to the occasion and ally with our Cities of Sigmar folks if the need arises. Do you guys have any other allies or folks you want to call out?
Yeah, I mean, narrative allies would be the Seraphon as well, because they're brought up and they're good. They're good Order buddies, although they're not literal allies as of yet. And then I'd like to point out that the cities themselves represent an alliance of sorts. Like they are a collection of disparate factions and cultures, like kind of forged together in like kind of the trauma of the Age of Chaos to build the cities themselves.
The allies were in you all along.
The allies were the friends we made along the way. All right, so that's some sweet lore and background that we've covered. But one of my favorite topics to talk about is what our favorite units of the book are. So we're getting smaller and smaller. We talked about our favorite cities. We talked about our favorite factions. Now let's talk about specific units that floated our boat. Davy, did you have any favorite units? Whether they're units that you've always liked, because all these are basically reprints of models that have already existed, or have you seen some units or models in a new light? From a new perspective that you hadn't thought about before?
So I like the idea of the Iron Breakers and Iron Drakes existing in context with these and having this specific role of, we're going to hold the line, we're going to fight in these tight confines and make things happen there. That's kind of a cool way for them to have a role within this greater thing, sort of this specialty that they're particularly good at. And I think the models are rad as heck. So it's fun to have them have a reason to be out there. And then I was never like all that excited about Pistoliers or Outriders, but I was reading about them just because Tempest Eye kind of spoke to me, and they look pretty neat. Rules wise, I don't have a good sense if they're strong or anything like that, but they talk about that idea of a verisimilitude, where it looks like they do what they are supposed to, and that I like the idea of these sort of dashing humans. I think we saw an Outrider in Black Pyramid, and he had a fabulous mustache and this sort of jaunty cavalier attitude. And so they seem like a cool set of units. I like them. What was anyone speak to you, Aaron?
Yeah, no. So I've always been a big fan of Wood Elves, and so a lot of the newer models in that range still get me excited. And so I would say that like just Wild Riders, which I never realized how hard that is to say quickly, still float my boat. I really like both like sort of the old lore behind them, but I don't know that it necessarily jive with sort of the new perspective on what a wild rider is. I feel like it doesn't harken back to that, that old lore behind it. And so I was trying to figure out what in this book does grab me, or what new perspective did I not consider before. And I found myself gravitating to the Scourge Privateers, and maybe I'll say specifically the Black Ark Fleetmaster if I had to pick one, but really all of them, in that I think they did a really good job repurposing or reimagining or reinventing what a dark elf could be in this new setting, in this new world, and how you would justify it being part of this like City of Sigmar book. And I don't know that they did a great job across the board, but with these, like these elves specifically, these pirates, these privateers, I think they did do a good job, and it's incredibly convincing, and how they might exist and how they might serve a role or a place in these cities. And I think I have been convinced of that both from this book, but then also from the Callus and Toll stories and Aretha Zenth. Anyways, but those stories are told so well from Nick Horth that really did a lot of work in winning me over, and because of that, I'm really I guess gung-ho about the Scourge Privateers, and I'd like to see that maybe more fleshed out, and would have liked to have seen them maybe get a little bit more screen time in this book. And it almost serves like sort of in a stark contrast to some of the other Dark Elf stuff. Not to get too negative on that, but I feel like some of these guys are real bad. They're doing secret nefarious plans in the alleys and stuff like that. But you gotta trust them because they're really good in a fight. I feel like that motif is repeated over and over with some of the other Dark Elf factions, whereas the Scourge Privateer, just as a whole, seemed a little bit more fresh, a little bit unique, and because of that, I like what they did with them. Plus, the models still either they're new or they hold up pretty well. So, cool. I like this that group as a whole. Paven, tell me about some of your favorite units.
Models I think are cool are the Celestial Hurricanum. I think is a dope mini. I really like the different options you have for the hero on Griffin. I think that's a really cool one. But what I like, Charybdis, honorable mention for sure. But I think what I like the most is trying to take miniatures from different ranges that were like kind of designed really separately and trying to build them into a cohesive force that kind of makes sense artistically and thematically. And, pulling Stormcast into them. And then I think that both is like a cool creative project and can really accentuate some of the differences, specifically like around Stormcast being giant demigods, and then putting them next to like, a small human with a stick and a big hat kind of really, shines a light on their differences and what makes them both unique.
Well, even just on the cover of this book, you have a great sword, posing jauntily in the front, but just off to the right, you can see I think a Retributor, and you're like, whoa, that guy is big. Like I think that's a visual of what you're talking about there. And that's cool. That's a neat duality to be able to think about and field and all that sort of thing.
So was the answer Stormcast?
The answer, I think the coolest minis are the couple like free, like the old Empire kits, I think are the ones that hold up the best. But what is most exciting to me from a hobby perspective is trying to combine all of these different ranges into a cohesive force.
I gotcha. Okay.
I don't know if that was the question you asked, but it's the question.
So the answer is the challenge that comes along with creating.
It's like the miniatures are inside of you all along.
Mm-hmm. It's the metaphorical miniature it's the perfect miniature that you're trying to achieve. I get it. I'm on board now, but I'm not really, because I hate conversions. But to each their own. But not really.
Yeah, I'm with you. I often like the idea of conversions more than the actual implementation.
So we're almost on the same side. Cool. So those are some of our favorite units, but man, there are a bazillion in this book. Whenever it comes down to and I know some people don't like this term, when you've got a soup battle tome, you're really wading through the options. Like the condensed, I don't know, what do we say, 6 or something, or no more than that, like 10 subfactions into one book. Obviously, there's going to be all sorts of other. Everybody's going to be able to find at least something that they like in this book, or if they don't, then you must be a chaos, death, or destruction player. So sometimes I like to talk about the special characters in the books, and I had written down here initially that there were no special characters, but Pavan, you had mentioned a certain individual that you wanted to chat about. What did you want to bring up about the Magister of Hammerhall himself?
Yeah, Aventus Firestrike deserves a special call out, I think, because he is the Magister of Hammerhall, and his city is in this book, Hammerhall, and he actually gets specific bonuses for being included in the Hammerhall army. So, given that there's no other named characters in the War Scrolls in the back, I think that is a cool call out and a cool synergy that they built into the rules. So you can have, like, you know, a city led by its boss, or not by its boss, but its best wizard.
By his number one wizard boy. It's interesting in that, like, Hammerhall's so important, and you would think then the Magister of Hammerhall would be just as important, but like he doesn't come up all that often in the lore and the stories. Like I don't hear his name dropped all that often. So if maybe this is an indication that like he's maybe going to start getting some more screen time, like I'd be all for that. Like I want to know more about the dude. What's his deal? What's his name? What's his sign? So because of that, I'd be interested to hear more about him. Plus, his model's pretty legit as well. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about that?
No, that's like all the information I have on this guy. So cool mini. He lives in Hammerhall. That's where his house is.
That's where he summers. All right, neat. Let's see if there's any other points of interest, any other things that jumped off the page at you guys. I'll start with one just that I found interesting. So, as far as I could tell, the Devoted of Sigmar, which was its own subfaction, has kind of almost been eliminated beyond just the flagellates. Specifically, a notable absence was the witch hunters. I understand they're sunsetting the model. I think they were probably all fine cast or metal at this point, but like we have spent a lot of time with witch hunters in the Moral Realms lately, or at least over the past 4 or 5 years or whatever it's been. And to see them like not even really mentioned in the book seemed crazy to me. Did anybody else feel the notable absence of the witch hunter?
So I know they specifically talked about them being in Hallow Heart, I think it was, but it was maybe just a line or two. If I'm gonna try to justify this, it always felt weird to me when witch hunters would come onto the battlefield. I guess like it never felt like that was the place that they were supposed to be. Like they're these kind of detectives and investigators, and they always felt like they should be operating on a smaller scale than a full scale battle. You know, it felt like bringing your chief inspector out. Like Sherlock Holmes showed up on the battlefild or something. And I know they're a more combative version than that, but I guess that. But they're so iconic to Warhammer, whether it's Age of Sigmar or Fantasy Battle. It feels weird to see them depart the game. So I wonder if we aren't going to see them again down the line at some point, a reimagining or a resculpt or something.
So you are optimistic.
Always.
Yeah, that describes you to a T. I guess I don't know. I'm just going to continue on. Another thing that I found interesting is that they mentioned somewhere in the book that the Collegiate Arcane have seemed to develop new and terrible weapons of war, like etheric lance cannons that can fire into other realms, orbs that slow time, and negastone arcs that drag everyone into like a gravitational pull. So I bring this up because there are no endless spells really in this book. They have some special rules about how they can interact with other endless spells, but they like how all the new factions are been getting their own signature spells. These folks haven't been getting them. They don't have any new models for the spells. But what they just described seemed like endless spells. It seems like they're doing work to create new, magical inventions or what have you. So I thought it was a weird lack to not have these new on the spells, but then sort of call out the work that the Collegiate Arcane is doing. So I gotta wonder if there's some plans in the pipeline, or is this just a nod to what could have been? It seems a little insulting. How dare they?
Yeah, I really like the etheric lance cannons, because that's some great, like, that shoot into other realms, because that's some grade A Age of Sigmar nonsense.
Yeah. Get your mind right, Age of Sigmar. What are you doing?
No, I mean that in as appreciative way as I possibly can. So, yeah, I was like, okay, what? Yeah.
Me too. And then finally, they say something about how the executioners, which is those dark elf executioners, some claim are both half elf and half shadowkin. Whoa, wiggity! What's a shadowkin? Like, again, you're just making nonsense up.
I feel like those were Malarians, buddies.
Yeah, I wonder if it's related to that Tenebral shard that we saw back in Silver Tower forever ago. And
ooh, fingers crossed. That's pretty cool. But this is me just dropping hints. This is me sifting through the words of this book, trying to find something interesting. Did you guys have any interesting points jump out at you?
Well, I have like a lot of like speculation around this book, and I love
speculation.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much into like trying to second guess Games Workshop's like kind of production decisions, because
if you don't, then who will?
Well, it's not. I don't know how valuable it is, and like, you know, some of the culling of certain factions were, I think, obviously like decisions to make about inventory and maybe like creating design space for other things to come through. But I think like there's a lot within this book is kind of like a base for the system to grow. Like, it's very easy to add more things to the Cities of Sigmar. Like just more cities would be something to simply do, and expand the number of like factions within it by giving them the faction keyword and these types of things. And I hope there is more opportunities to really dig into these cities and get like more out of it. And my like secret great fear, and I don't know if this it strikes the right tone for the podcast, is like, this is where miniatures go to die, is this book. So I really hope that's not the case, and I don't think it will be the case now that they have a proper tome. But yeah,
I think it's a 50-50 shot. I think there's an equal chance that this is the end. This is the last time. This was just to get them like a book. Mm-hmm. It's now shut. It's shipped, and like that's the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, okay, like you know, if you think that's right to do, Games Workshop, I'll be here for you. But yeah, but
I won't be here.
I feel like there's a space that needs to be filled with like, you're just a guy, right? In the mortal realms. Like, how do you like? That is the most. That is the position where you can empathize the most with as a guy in the real world. I think there needs to be some representation for that, and this is like a great place for it. And like, I feel like if you took that out, you need like it would be a missed opportunity not to have like something else in there. And that's why I'm hoping that they dig in deeper and they expand this in cool ways. Also, if I'm going to wish list, like, let's get some rules for my own cities. Like, you know, like that's the next fun thing, is just like thinking about your own city and its own background and how does it fit and how does it diverge from the norm. And it'd be nice to be able to, if there was more rule support for that.
Madison in the realm of Hitch. Davey, what thoughts did you have, or interesting points did you have? Well, and I'll be the judge if they're interesting.
I really liked how they, you know, sometimes when you could almost see the checklist happening when you're going through the cities. Like, oh, this is the city that will be down with fire slayers. This is a city that is cool with overlords. But I've recognized that they kind of needed to do that, and they did a pretty good job building a story around the things that they wanted to do. And then what I really liked is that I read the story, and then I would go look at the back and see how that army was built. And so all these armies, they got a storm keep at the center of them. So 1 in every 4 units can be a stormcast unit, and it gets all the relevant keywords that it needs to have. Similarly, if they're a particular city that Sylvaneth can be 1 in every 4 for the living city. They can't ally, because I think it would be weird to both ally and have it in there. But also the other people who can't ally are Greywater Fastness, just straight up are not allowed to bring. And I really like those little nods to the background. I don't know, you know, you can see that and you say this is something that they didn't do because they were searching for the perfect competitive balance. This is something they did because it made sense from a story perspective, and that's something that I appreciate more and more these days.
Yeah, that is neat. That's a good thought. Okay, interesting point. I'll give it to you. All right, and you know who else has interesting points? Our listeners. So they had questions that they wanted us to talk about, and we would be remiss if we did not. So we asked in our Discord channel, which can be found at themortalrealms.com/discord. And let's jump right into them. Thundercake wants some narrative hooks. He wants to know if anything grabbed us and if we could deliver any narrative hooks for him. I feel like Paven's the guy to ask here for that.
Yeah, there are a bunch of narrative hooks. I think specifically for like where the Mortal Realms are going in the future, I think there's a lot of things that can be expanded off of. Like for hobby, I think you want to create your own city, but there's a lot in here for building a city according to how it is in the real Mortal Realms.
All right, Davy.
I thought there was a cool thing with Anvilgard. There's the caverns below that Hallowed Knights are marching into, and other expeditions are going into and not coming back. So there's something rotten at the heart of Hallowheart, and Paven talked a little bit about that as well when he was covering the city. But there's something to sort of latch onto if you're looking to create your own campaign or a background or something like that. That'd be pretty interesting, and it gives you somewhere, make a Tzeentchian force that is coming after Hallowheart. Or if you're, doing that, you have build a force that they're fighting against that has a whole bunch of endless spells or something like that. Like that felt like the kind of hook that I thought was interesting and you could run with a little bit.
What I want to figure out is how you could implement a rule or something where you could run a living city army with all or almost all wanderers and Sylvaneth, but then also have a setup in such a way that like you would be maybe like a re-envisioning of like some of the old animosity rules where like not everyone is exactly on the same page or pulling in the same direction, and there's that old that wound that folks are sort of picking at, and that like you're feeling an old, I guess the equivalent of an old wood elf army, but there's sort of the internal strife. I don't know how you'd implement a rule there, but I think that would be something cool to play around with. Is something that kind of grabbed me, and it's not just because I have a wood elf army and I want to use both sides of the models. I would never do that. But I think there's a lot of other narrative hooks. I think they're all going to be based around the cities, based off of what we know about the cities, and then maybe you extrapolate that. You see, all right, well, we've got our cities that are listed in this book, and this is how it translates to army composition. All right, well, let me look at some of the other cities that aren't in this book and take what I know about them and come up with my own versions of those, one-to-one army compilations out there. I feel like you can do creative stuff with the cities in Shyish, in Gur, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's plenty of other cities out there that haven't even been touched in this Battletome. Josh, our boy from Dogs of Warcry, Fractal Rain, wants to know if there's rules for custom cities. I don't think there are in this book. But then he also wants some of those juicy lore hints, which I think we talked about a few before. But Josh, I'll give you another one that I came up with, in that there's a quote in this book. There are skeletal cities rising within the dark places of the world, which I think is probably a direct reference to the OCR Bone Reapers. So we know that Battletome is going to be hot on the heels of this one. So that just sort of leads into that next stage of the story that we're seeing. Do you guys have any other juicy lore hints that you want to share with Josh?
I didn't feel like there were a ton of references that we've seen other places. This felt like it was more a broadening rather than an advancing sort of book here, would be my take. As far as custom cities, I think there is room to kind of take a look. Like if I was going to do, if you really want to do Excelsis, then maybe Tempestize, kind of where you link in, you make your unit choices maybe with a little less flying options, and those are 100% still there, available for you. And some of the prophecy style command abilities they have kind of tie in well with that. So I think with 7 cities existing, there's room enough that you might be able to find something that kind of works for the city you were thinking of, and just kind of re-skin it, so to speak.
Well, my city has all of those special rules, so there. Tomb King Tristan wants us to talk about how the book doesn't have a named character, which I think we kind of alluded to before, and how that affects the narrative that's given in the book. Does this contrast to other books that do? I think it is sort of... Well, let me ask you, let you guys answer first. Do you guys have any thoughts on Tristan's question? Whether the fact that there is no real named character in this book, at least on a war scroll level, and whether that or not that affects the narrative.
Yeah, I want to just echo Davy's point here, where we're not really moving the story forward in the book. We're kind of consolidating the gains we've already made and fleshing out the places we already know. So yeah, we didn't really learn about any new cities, but we certainly got a lot more information about the cities we got, and I think that comes through in there aren't really new players entering the stage, although existing players are mentioned.
Davey, how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I like that the focus ends up being sort of on the people here rather than the heroes. I think that's where. I think that's the part that's the more interesting to me, I guess. I hear a lot about the heroes elsewhere. So tell me about the peoples.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is that the Cities of Sigmar are very much an everyman kind of book, in that generally the idea is these are the sorts of people that you maybe could identify with the most, and if you start throwing around named characters, that becomes you're less able to sort of... I don't know if this is the goal, but sort of superimpose yourself on top of, these people that have names and deeds and accomplishments. Maybe this is just my self-deprecation showing. But I think given that we're trying to keep it as ground level as possible, these are as the foot sloggiest of the foot sloggers, it allows us to sort of stay under those named characters, where we stay below that level, which I think is maybe to the book's credit. Whereas when we talk about other battle tomes, they maybe have a larger scope or larger scale or a larger than life list of peoples included, and then that comes with the need for those named characters as well. Koros wants to know if there's anything juicy about spell hunters in here. I feel like we've talked a bit about spell hunters. And is there anything else you guys want to add about spell hunters before I get to the second part of his question?
No, it's kind of mentioned a little bit in passing. It wasn't built out quite as much as somebody who really wanted to know more about it would be excited about. But it's mentioned. It's there. It hasn't been forgotten. So.
Sure. But then also, did it being the book satisfy the commonly expressed need for having a clear idea of how regular people live? The units in the book are still trained soldiers, but how in depth does it go on the people these soldiers are protecting? Kind of not really, right?
Right. It gives some sense of how the cities, what makes them tick. What industry or trade is kind of their jam, and so you can get a little bit, figure out that there's these different districts and that sort of thing, or here's some of the jobs that might exist there, but. It doesn't drill down to here's what everyday life is for that sort of thing. You should probably read some of the novels.
Yeah, it's definitely more economics, politics, and history more than it is sociology or personal stories.
Whoa, cut my answer and just leave his. That's much better.
Oh no, I need them to be next to each other so people can compare and contrast. Yeah, so unfortunately, this, there was that joke, farmers of whatever Battletome that was going around for a while. This isn't that, for better or worse, I guess, in that you're definitely not getting... When I say you're at the ground level, you're not at that level. These folks still have swords and stuff. So if that's what you're looking for, you might not be satisfied with this book as that avenue to get that information. Tyromancer Dan C wants to know, why do you think they still mention the Eldritch Council if they're not included in the book? I thought the same thing, and that kind of alluded to my Devoted to Sigmar question too. But I think as people know, folks may not know, that they did sunset a lot of units, and in doing so, maybe even some of the factions as well that would have, in a previous life been part of this book. The Eldritch Council being one of them, which is basically all the like high elf mages and stuff. Why do you think they mentioned it?
Yeah, I think they just wrote that part that mentioned it before they just made the final decisions on what miniatures to sunset. Would be my best guess. But I think just because a miniature doesn't exist doesn't mean it doesn't exist in the lore.
That's what I was going to say. That's good.
Like they I guarantee we'll keep reading about witch hunters as we go along through the fiction.
But I don't want to.
Why not?
Because there's been too many witch hunter books. There's been like 12 witch hunter books. Okay, I'm half joking. Like this has got a real serious tone, but there's just too many witch hunters. Is all I'm trying to tell you.
All right. Get rid of them all. Kill them all.
But
out with the old, in with the new.
Kill them all. Let Aaron sort them out.
And I will. I wouldn't be able to stop myself from sorting them out. But yeah, no. To just echo what was just said, I think just because there's not a miniature for it, or even if it's not in the book, doesn't mean it doesn't exist in the world. And I'm fine with I'm fine with them still talking about it. I know some people would maybe get perturbed that like don't bring it up if I can't buy it.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, and I almost prefer that they bring it up, so it's not like we're pretending that this thing never existed just because there isn't a product to buy. But like this should be a real and persistent world, and we don't need to have a miniature for everything and a rule for everything to like have it exist in the lore. And if you still have like the old mage, like high elf mage models, they can easily be used as like as collegiate arcane folks. Without, I don't think, too much cognitive dissonance.
In fact, I think they should. All right, so that was all our listener questions. Great questions, everybody. Thank you for submitting them. If at any point you, listener, want to ask questions, you're going to have to join the Discord. It's at themoralrealms.com/Discord. And whenever we are about to record an episode, I remember like a couple of hours beforehand and then send a little message saying, hey, ask us questions. And people always do because they're great and very accommodating. Before we get to the very, very end, last section, let's swing back real quick and see if anybody has any Black Library recommendations. That if someone wanted to find out more about the cities of Sigmar and the armies therein, and they wanted to go dive in deep into the offerings of Black Library, what recommendations would we have? What stories ought they read if they want to scratch that itch? I've got some thoughts, but I bet you Davy's got some good ones too.
Sure. Already mentioned Black Pyramid a few times. I thought for cities that kind of fall outside of, if you're looking to really sort of expand into cities that are maybe even more esoteric than some of the ones shown here, Age of Sigmar Legends, Pestilence had the city on the back of the giant worm, which that's pretty fun. And so they ended up fighting their way through that, but you got some sense of how that city was constructed there and some of the culture of that. And also Soul Wars gave something of a look at how a city in the realm of death looks. So that would be my recommendations for if you're looking to branch out a little bit.
Sure. Paven, I'll ask, but do you have any Black Library recommendations?
Well, actually, I do have one. Now, Black Library isn't really my wheelhouse, but I did read Hammer Hall and other stories, and I enjoyed what was in there, and they do spend some time in Hammer Hall, and we brought it up in this podcast, and I think it's certainly worth a read.
Yeah, Josh Reynolds. I will echo what some of the suggestions here. I'll echo Black Pyramid by Josh Reynolds in that he spends a lot of time on like what it would take to like secure and start the development of a city of Sigmar, basically. So I think that's a unique perspective that you don't really get anywhere else. And we're spending less time in a fully fledged city and rather in the beginning, seeds of a city. So I think because of that, it makes it very interesting. And then Hammer Hall that Paven recommended is great. In that I want to spend as much time in Hammer Hall as possible, and that's just one example of that. I'll recommend 8 Lamentations. It's less maybe city-based, and just more it's the combined workings of different folks from different backgrounds working together, sort of not even necessarily under Sigmar is the case may be, but it's sort of a microcosm for the cities of Sigmar as a whole, I think. So the 8 Lamentations series, there's a couple stories that are all very good. And then Callus and Toll, another witch hunter based story, but they spend a lot of time, in City of Secrets, which is the first in their series, and in Excelsis, which is a primo City of Sigmar that you learn a lot about city living in the mortal realms. It's one of the first ones where they spend time in an urban setting. And then finally, I'd recommend, surprisingly, Gloomspite, which we just read a couple months ago for the show. It's not so much about Gloomspite gets, but rather what a city has to do to sort of weather the storm of a Gloomspite incursion. And it's another story that spends a lot of time in a very different city. And it just goes to show what another example of what urban living looks like yet again in the city of Bakshi. So also pretty good. So that's a couple of books, and by a couple I mean a lot of books that should whet your appetite for more Cities of Sigmar if you want to go check those out. And we've reviewed a lot of them on the show, so they're all pretty delightful. All right, let's get to our final thoughts. Let's give your final impressions. I'll ask Paven first. Any review, highlights, final thoughts? Lay it all on the table.
All right. Highlights are, I think, always for me, like the hobby opportunity presented in this Battletome. I think it's very cool it's a very cool set of projects that you can think about when trying to build out your own city using like kind of the miniatures provided. I am most excited to see where they go from here. Maybe they expand something in a White Dwarf, or maybe we do get a miniature release related to these kind of alliance of mortals. But it's kind of like the first step. It feels more like to me than maybe like the final one. But otherwise, two thumbs up. Do we do that?
We should. You can set your own scale. And thumbs it is. You've chosen well, Davy. Give me some thoughts.
I'd like to. I guess because they hung out in Gyron and Akshi for those. I mean, these are cities that they've established already. There was some fun in sort of the duality of that, the symmetry of it. I don't know if you appreciated that, but I would have.
Of course, I did.
I would have liked to have had the chance to branch out to some more realms, and maybe we'll see that more down the line. But it left me interested in more. Even like, oh well, what's the perspective when you're in Shaman? What's the perspective when you're in Shyish? And that feels like particularly relevant given all the bad stuff that old Nagash is up to these days. So I think I was looking for a little bit more there. I think they had a really hard job because these, unlike some of the other factions that have been released, this is not only so they did a cool job of updating the Flesh Eater courts. They found a way to bring Bone Splitters forward. They've found a way to kind of advance some of these other factions. These are not only a faction that needs to be advanced, but it's lots of them that need to be tied together, and that seems really challenging. And I think they pulled it off about as well as anyone could have. So I will give it 5 out of 7 Cities of Sigmar.
Perfect. I agree with a lot of what you guys were saying. I think it did feel like a first pass, like at a first attempt. And mulling it over, and maybe I take back what I said before, and that like I would like to think that they would continue on. But if they do spend more time with the Cities of Sigmar, I do hope they move forward. I think this is a good a good review of what has come so far, and a rehashing of I think some of the information that maybe exists in other places. Or maybe a reconfirmation of a lot of that information, and a redrawing of, I guess, a line in the sand of, all right, well, these are the things that now definitively exist in these cities. We've culled the chaff, and this is going to be our core, our base. But I do want to see what if they are going to use the base, what direction they build off in, and to what degree. So because of that, it left me wanting more, but in a sort of a justifiable, like reasonable space. Like it was supposed to like leave you wanting more, because I think Paven said earlier, it does serve a very good purpose about putting you at this like level, this eye level of the general everyman, and I think that serves a purpose, and it'll always be useful, regardless of how big the stakes get in the world. We're going to want to have stories and not just stories, but armies and physical manifestations of that small scale. Not super stoked with all the decisions that they made and how much focus they put on the Dark Elves. Was crazy. Like there was a lot of pages dedicated to just rehashing these Dark Elves in these Cities of Sigmar. It was absurd. And so maybe I would have cut down on those a little bit. Like maybe the decisions on what got cut and what got left in, maybe I would have varied a little bit. But generally, I think they did a fine job. And then I in the same vein, I guess I did like the Scourge Privateers. But at any rate, I think it was a good attempt, and I think it probably served a purpose from their release schedule as well. Like I'm sure it did what it needed to do to catch these units up. And so because of that, I think it was a good product. And if I had to get a rating system, I can't think of a clever one off the top of my head. Paul's not here. Let's say I'll give it a 6 out of 8 spider legs.
6 out of 8 panicked grunts.
Yep, panicked grunts. 6 out of 8 as it were. All right, and those are our thoughts, and they were really good thoughts. So unless there's anything else that you guys want to talk about, let's close her out. It's time for our reforging, but Sigmar willing, we'll be back soon. Like, subscribe, share, or leave a review. Join us on Discord, drop a donation on our Patreon. Anything you can do will spread the word of Sigmar farther than we can on our own. Chat with us anytime about your thoughts on Twitter, @TheMortalRealms. Davey, where can they find you on the internet?
You can find me at @red_Zeke, and also for the What the Hex podcast at WTHcast.
And Paven, where can they find you on the internet?
They can find me in the Discord channel, but also on the Dogs of War podcast.
And I'm Aaron. You can find me on Twitter at DosAsos. And you can find all our Mortal Realms shows and content at www.themortalrealms.com.
I don't know, Aaron, you kind of put me on the spot here. I don't really have a great answer.
I thought this is what you liked. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know, man. It's like the ball was thrown right at me.
Yeah, right in the dome.
Good insightful comments.